Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. This is the third of a short series of podcasts in a relationship to things like marketing and type and money. And the reason why we're going to be talking about money is the third of this series, because it probably doesn't feel like a very cohesive series.
It's an emergent series.
It's an emergent series that happened over time. And the reason why is we originally wanted to talk about types in marketing, but then we got caught up in this conversation around how marketing isn't evil, almost as if we felt the need to apologize for the concept of marketing to begin with. And one of the reasons for that is we have been seeing more and more like feedback and comments and just general impressions that people find this concept of marketing and making money and capitalizing on your talents to make money as being like icky or wrong or gross. And I mean, when I say feedback, I don't mean like necessarily just to us. I mean like in general conversations online. I'm a Redditor and I'll go on Reddit and I'll read like lots of conversations around different concepts or different industries, and there seems to be and I can't even tell where the line is, but there's like a territory marker of like acceptable ways of making money and unacceptable ways of making money. And anything that's acceptable is something that's already in the social infrastructure. Like if you go to a cubicle job, like you went and got a job and now you're working for a business that exists, and that's an acceptable way of making money, and you want that business to keep making money because that's where your paycheck comes from.
And marketing to get that job by using your resume was totally appropriate.
Yeah, exactly. And the marketing that your company does in order to generate more income, in order to pay your paycheck, that's all completely acceptable too. But then there's this sense that there are unacceptable ways to make money. And one of those is if you are, there's certain entrepreneurial endeavors that people think is that's just gross, that you would try to make money off of the thing you're doing, all the way up to people who generate a lot of money. If you make a ton of money, especially if you're at the top of an industry or if you're at the top of some sort of business or corporation, like you must have been a bad person to do that. If you want to make a lot of money, you must be bad. So there's this really interesting relationship that people have. And I think especially, I don't know if it's younger people. I don't know. I don't want to say like it's just younger people. I think Gen Xers can fall into this, and boomers not so much. Boomers like went through the 80s, and so boomers made peace with money a long time ago, I think. But there's a certain sentiment that certain people have that money is the root of all evil, and it's just wrong to try to make money. If you want to make a lot of money, then that makes you a bad person. And I just can't help but call bullshit on all of this. I just can't help it. And so we wanted to record a podcast that discusses why people might have this really weird relationship with money, maybe some of the roots of what's going on for them. And if you find yourself in a place where you have a knee-jerk response to this concept of making money as being necessarily bad or wrong, maybe we can persuade you to think in a slightly different way, maybe in a more healthy way when it comes to making money, because it still is effectively it is how we all are able to subsidize our lives. It is how we exist in the modern world. So let's see if we can get a little healthier relationship with money. You know,
we did some of these videos a while back, mind wiring videos, where we took different personality types and recorded basically information on how the mind is wired. And in between each segment, I think it's like 5 segments, I think between 2 of them, I casually mentioned like, oh, and hey, if you want more information or you'd like to invest in one of our premium programs, head over to personalityhacker.com. And then I would go on and keep explaining the information. And a lot of people were polarized by this. They came on and they did make comments like, this is terrible. I was sitting here listening to information, and I had to hear an advertisement in the middle of information that I really wanted to get without ads. It's disgusting. You would do, like some of these comments we were erased because they're really hostile. Some of them we leave up and we answer if it's legitimate response and it's not just name calling. We will respond to some of these. And some people have said things like, nothing good has come from marketing, and it's the evil of all the world. And both of us are kind of like looking at each other going, well, you were obviously marketed to purchase the computer and to sign up for the YouTube subscription or to get onto YouTube. Like somebody got this information to you.
The internet subscription for the service provider.
Service provider, but also getting onto YouTube. You had to know that existed. The message had to get out somewhere. You had to see the value in that. And you're sitting there having used products and services to access the video that we just played for you and you've paid money to access it. Like you've paid your internet service provider, you purchased a computer or a smartphone or something, you're accessing this, and then you're demonizing the very things that got you to this point as completely bad and wrong, because you didn't just make those decisions in vacuums. You obviously made a decision, I would think, this person made a decision based on the best smartphone or the best computer or the best internet service provider or whatever, right? Or the best YouTube channel or the best of what it is. Name it.
Or just what's available.
Sure.
That's fine. It doesn't have to be the best, but they had to be made aware of it in some way, and they made that choice.
Sure. So I guess it's the schism between, like, it doesn't make any sense to me to demonize something you're benefiting from in order to be able to demonize it. It's like the parasite eating the host in a way. So that's just a little bit of our personal experience with some of the backlash. And I think, we've been talking a lot about this idea of marketing in the last few sessions and how there seems to be a disconnect between the creator, the person or the entity that creates something like the product or service or the nonprofit that's doing the good work, and then the people that are responsible for getting the message out. And often those have a schism between them. The people getting the message out, the marketers, quote unquote, aren't the same people that created the product or service. And we're starting to get used to that in our culture, right? We hear a message like, well, that person didn't even create that. They're just the guy or the gal that's the marketing mouthpiece for this thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really, it's sometimes a really abrasive thing. If you are an actual creator and you put stuff out in the world and you get that hostility back against marketing messages, that could be jarring for you because you put your heart and soul into something to really benefit people. You're asking for, you're not even asking, you're giving the opportunity for someone to return value for what you've created. And instead it's met with hostility instead of like, oh, I really appreciate what you're doing there. And it almost feels like sometimes you can't do enough. Like people want and want and want, and there's nothing that can be done that will have them see a different perspective of that, I should say.
Right. Well, because they come from a place of cynicism. And I think the reason why, for me, this is so, I think needs to be addressed as opposed to something we just shrug off, is that as we've established in the previous two podcasts, marketing isn't just about selling a product. Marketing is anytime you're broadcasting a message to the masses. And part of the reason why we choose dubious leaders and we make the decisions that we make is because we have a really jacked up relationship with marketing. Like we've gotten to a point where we can only think in terms of sound bites. And then we have to make decisions, like really big, high level decisions based on these marketing messages. And so because we see marketing as evil, we have we push it away. We don't really study it or think about it or understand it. And so in time periods where marketing is truly important, like who you're going to vote for or what direction you're going to go with, with your entire paradigm or the way that you see reality, you're not looking at the marketing messages that are getting sent to you because you think marketing is only attached to money. And marketing is actually attached to any time somebody's advertising a concept to you and wants to get your attention. So when we think of marketing as icky, we actually end up undermining our ability to understand it. We also undermine our ability to utilize it because there's a lot of marketing that we have to do as people that has nothing to do with commercial marketing. And it has to do with wanting to make an impact on the world. Like how we craft these podcasts in part is marketing. We need to make sure that we're communicating a concept to you, the listener, that makes sense to you and is important to you like it is to us, or make it important to you because it's important to us, because we want other people to think in a way where we, that we say is empowering and gives people an ability to think for themselves. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to persuade you to see our side of things because we think our side of things is the best way to go, right? We have a bias towards the way that we think and we want you to think like us. And so basically this is a form of marketing. This is a broadcasting of an idea. And if we do it well, we're persuasive and we get you to change your mind. And so if you understand those marketing principles, marketing as in what are the best ways to craft those messages, then you can also have an impact. You can also utilize the same tools to be able to get people to think like you if you believe you have good things to say.
Let's take the money piece though. You said people intrinsically link marketing to money, and that's really what we want to talk about here. How I see money, okay, and money, it doesn't matter really the currency, whether it's Bitcoin or it's the US dollar or, the European Union, what is it, the euro, right? Whatever financial money you're using, it does touch all of us. It's something that transcends borders, language, culture, religion, personality type, age, socioeconomic, like demographics. It transcends all of that. It is, at this point in human history, it is the one entity, this encapsulated container of value, let's call it, this money, this piece of paper or this coin or this ones and zeros online. It is a container of value that all of us keep score and interface with, except maybe people living out literally in the bush somewhere. But even they, in their little town or village, away from society, probably have developed some way of holding and containing value that's portable and transferable, whatever that monetary system is, whether it's beads or beans or rice or food, whatever it is, some kind of a trading. In prison, they trade cigarettes, right? We all have a way that we've monetized or we've we all have a way that we have encapsulated value in something that means something else. We've created a shared narrative around what this means. In prison, cigarettes are currency. You actually trade value using a pack of cigarettes. It's a useful item. It's a tangible, useful item, but it still is a form of currency. It has a narrative attached to it. Dollars are not traded, but cigarettes are. So that's an example of just how pervasive this idea of money or value encapsulation is among all of us. We all do it. We all use it. So it's something we have to get, clarity around and get a really good relationship with, because it's not going anywhere anytime soon.
No, it might end up evolving to look like something else. But essentially, money is just like you mentioned, it's a portable way of having value so that you can do trade. Like if we didn't have money, we would be back to the barter system, which is a very inefficient way of trading. So money isn't going anywhere. And if you don't have a good relationship with it, like if you hate the concept of money, well, there's the religious adage, and actually Joel mentioned this earlier, which I thought was brilliant. He's like, how biblically it states that the love of money is the root of all injurious things, or whatever your translation says. He's like, well, love and hate are just two sides of the same coin. So if you have like this icky relationship with money, like you're basically creating the same dynamic with money as somebody who loves it is. Like you end up seeing this neutral tool as something to have an emotional charge around. And anytime you have an emotional charge around something that's neutral, it means it's got you by the balls, not the other way around. So it's important to realize that your relationship with money needs to be healthy, just like your relationship with all the things in your life that aren't going anywhere. Making sure that you have as healthy a relationship with the thing it's representing as well is basically part of our hierarchy of needs. It's one of the lowest basement needs is a sense of safety and security, which currently is represented in our money. Now, I suspect that one of the reasons why we have such a difficult time building a good relationship with it is that money is one of the few things that feels concrete, but is actually quite abstract. Like we look at these dollar bills, these little Robert Anton Wilson calls biosurvival tickets, and they feel concrete in our hand. They feel like a real thing. It's a piece of paper and it feels like I'm holding it. It's a tangible thing. Or it's represented in our debit card, which feels like a real thing. It's this little piece of plastic. And so because money feels like a real thing, we forget that it's actually an abstraction. All of those little green biosurvival tickets, green in our in the country that we're in, the United States, but multicolored in other countries, what it is it's a promissory note between the two of us, or almost like it's a socially programmed agreement that you and I are both going to evaluate this piece of paper the same. We're both going to 100% agree on its evaluation based on a piece of information we get from somebody else. Like you and I don't get to determine the value of a dollar. Somebody else tells us the value of the dollar, and then we have to obey it, and then we have to trade it with that piece, with that understanding between us. It's like a social contract. And that's a very abstract thing. The idea of a piece of paper having an evaluation between the two of us, the second we stop seeing that value is the second it loses all value and all meaning.
And that has to be socially constructed. And you want to get a really clear vision of this. hand a dollar bill or whatever currency you use to a baby or a toddler and just see how much they value the shared, socialized, constructed view of that with you. They might tear it up or throw it away or try to eat it. Mostly probably try to eat it. But basically you're seeing a really good example of how this is just a social construct. There's actually no real value there. Now, these can be turned into things that do have real value. So that little biosurvival ticket, as you called it, can be translated into a television, a car, food, things that do have value. But as far as the container of value, it's very abstract and it's just a shared reality we've all agreed upon.
Yeah, well, and it can't be turned into those other things unless we have that shared agreement.
Correct.
And so what's interesting though is at one time the dollar actually was like a promissory note to the bank. In the United States, I mean, I don't know how the currencies work globally, but in the United States, basically every single dollar was a certificate, like a silver or gold certificate, where you could take it to the bank and it was backed by a little piece of gold or like a little piece of silver. You could hand it to the person at the bank and they would give you a piece of silver or a piece of gold that was commensurate with that little promissory note or that silver or gold certificate. But at a certain point in the 20s, I think it was basically around the time of the crash, in the stock market crash, they determined to no longer have the money be backed by anything. So at that point, money got super abstract. It got really, really, really abstract because it was no longer a note that could be exchanged for something physical or tangible. It just existed. It just was. And at this point, it's being, in the past, it used that, those the pieces of gold and the pieces of silver as a control. But now it's actually a debt structure that ends up controlling it, which is all now, reliant upon interest rates. So a certain percentage of debt has to exist in order for more money to be printed, because the money being printed is basically being printed against the debt. And so it gets kind of complex. Like there's a certain point where if you talk to most people about what money is and how it works, the overwhelming majority of people have no idea how the monetary system works or how economics works or how why this dollar means something. Most people don't know. So they're just taking it 100% on faith. So already you could see why people have an odd relationship with money, because somehow they hand this over. And most of the time we don't even hand money over anymore. We just swipe a card in a card reader. And the ones and zeros and little digital, whatever code is being brought up to indicate how much money you have, which is all digital ones and zeros, somehow you're getting products and services for those ones and zeros. It's all it's basically works like magic. Money is effectively magic for most people. And so to have a relationship with something that works beyond your understanding and is effectively magic, it makes it really easy to misunderstand what's going on.
And add the complexity of, we're just talking about being in one country with one currency, with one shared reality of that. Now let's scale it out to the globe, where we have multiple currencies, multiple economies, multiple debt structures functioning across multiple different channels and countries and places and continents. You can see the complexity just starting to scale on really, really big levels.
Well, and then to add on top of all of that and the complexity of money and how difficult it is to understand, because it's such a behemoth. It's like the systems in it are just ridiculously complex. Add to that, if we don't have it, we die.
It's fundamental to our survival.
Yeah, at this point it is. And so for us to have our survival needs met in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and in order to have safety and security needs met, we do that 100% at this point based on money. Most of us are not off the grid. Most of us are not feeding ourselves 100% through hunting and gathering. Most of us are not warming ourselves 100% through off the grid technologies. Most of us are plugged into a system where money is required. And so because of that, we build a resentment to this thing that works like magic, and we are totally reliant on to not die or to not have our children die.
A resentment along with an anxiety. It's like those two things in combination. We resent maybe the power or the abstract nature of it or the need for it. A lot of people, and I think I hear this conversation, I think a lot of different generations have this, but I really get a resentment from a lot of millennials to say, I don't want to, like, I resent the fact that I have to like generate all this stuff to be able to survive. Like, shouldn't life have been figured out by now? We're humans and we're smart enough to have all the technology for us to survive without the hustle, without having to have money to survive. Like, we have the ability. And I would agree with this line of thought. As humans, if we all put our effort to it, within a week, we could set up an entire world probably, if everybody focused on it together, to where we wouldn't need money. We could just take care of ourselves in certain ways. Now, there'd probably be some other kind of transactional element coming from that, but there's probably ways to solve problems that are much more sophisticated than we've been able to get to with all the infighting we have as humans. So I think there's this anxiety, there's that resentment you're talking about, and then there's the other piece of it is just the element of it's moving and it's shifting fast, and we realize that we're not going to be able to keep up with the shifts. As an example, Bitcoin. It's an online digital blockchain currency, basically, that is transcending nations and borders and economic systems. It's causing governments to have to really take a hard look and say, how are we going to regulate this new currency, this new digital currency? And there's variations of this all over the place springing up. Bitcoin is just one of them. It's changing really fast, and the adaptability of that is going to, how do we figure that out as we move forward? So the anxiety is not just in the moment of having to generate money. The resentment is not just in the moment of having to generate money. The anxiety is also future-paced. What's coming down the road? What kind of anxieties are we going to be facing? Who's going to be in control of all this resource? And when I say resource, I mean the abstract representation of resource, because if you have a lot of money, you actually don't have resource. You have the potential for resource. You have the potential to turn that little ones and zeros or dollar bill into resource because of our shared, agreement on this, basically. So I think these are things that are very complex, very difficult to understand. And I think as we move forward to realize just how emotional all of this is for all of us, I think the emotions is where I think you could really get a key into your relationship with money based on the emotions that happen for you when you think about money, when you go to your job, when you create value and then get money back for it, when you bank, when you invest, when you spend. You probably have various emotions attached to all of those activities around money. And there's a lot to be gleaned and a lot to be learned from your internal emotions that come up when you're engaged with currency.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking about some of the things that create the anxiety inside of us when we think about money. To piggyback on top of that, for some people, it creates resentment. For other people, it creates determination to make it. Like, they don't want to feel that anxiety. And so instead of resenting having to feel that anxiety, they're gonna solve the problem. They're just never gonna feel that anxiety again. And so then they end up getting into this mode of wanting to make money for themselves and for their families. And so that's where the safety and security need gets stuck in that need to get safety and security for yourself and your family. And there could be some achievement in there for sure. But for the most part, we see these people who generate wealth as the end game. Like, generating wealth itself, like, there's never enough money to be made, because making more money is that it's not a strategy. It's the result that they want, is to just perpetually make more money. And then they get really ruthless about it. So there's a percentage of the population that has just pushed their will. They've just focused their will on generating income and material wealth. And so they hurt other people along the way. And then they become avatars of what money can do to a person. They become avatars of, and especially if they are part of a percentage of people who have all the wealth, and there's so many people going without, and there's no wealth redistribution mode in there, then it becomes like these people are evil. They're wrong. Like, people are suffering. They need medical attention. They don't have the money for it. They need high quality food and they don't have the money for it. They might even have money for electricity or for clothes or for housing or whatever. Like, their their survival needs are going unmet. And yet these people have more than they could ever spend in a lifetime. So the stratification of these two things, combined with the anxiety that a person might feel without the determination to make more necessarily, you could see why people have this really icky relationship with money and wanting to make money. And then they project that anxiety that they feel inside of themselves about the situation that they don't know how to solve. they project that as intent onto others. If they see somebody making money, well, then that person must have bad intent. Like, I just go to my job just to cover my bills, and that somehow makes me virtuous. Like, I have virtue because I'm not chasing this thing, but these people over here that are chasing it, they must not be virtuous. So this neutral tool of money then ends up getting like an assignation to it, a virtue or vice assignation in the accumulation of it. And I think we mentioned this on an old podcast called "Is Making Money Making Money Bad or Making Money Evil?" And we're probably covering some similar ground to that particular podcast. But I think the important thing here is the idea that at this stage in the game, it really isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And that concept that you mentioned before, which is we're at this stage of history, shouldn't we have figured this all out? Well, my personal opinion is we're actually not that far in history. Like, we've been around for a long time, and the current incarnation of even having civilizations is, I mean, if you look at the space of time it took for us to get here, most of the time we have not been quote unquote civilized. The overwhelming majority of our history as human beings have been not utilizing currency or money. Like, we had very rudimentary forms of trade for the overwhelming majority of our past. And we've only really started to sort of manipulate this thing and understand how it could work in greater and greater sophistication. But we haven't evolved to a place where we really get it. Like, there are entire think tanks filled with incredibly educated, very intelligent people just sitting around all day trying to figure this stuff out. And it's too complex to solve. So we're talking about a technology that we invented that has outpaced our ability to truly apprehend it at the same time. It's like non-simultaneously apprehended. We can only understand certain components of it at any given time, but we can't understand the entire spectrum. So we aren't going to solve this anytime soon as a human species. We will solve it eventually if we're smart enough, if we can go that direction. But in the meantime, money isn't going anywhere. And so how do we have a healthy relationship with it? How do we utilize it as the technology we invented? How do we utilize it for the best? And how do we get out of this victim, villain, hero thinking where people who have money are villains and people who don't have money are victims and we just need a hero to come in? Like, how do we get out of that ridiculous drama triangle thinking and get into an empowered place where we recognize it doesn't have to be about money, but when money gets put into the equation, things start to happen. It is a very powerful tool to wield influence and to be able to make an impact in the world and to be able to have, like, sometimes a seat at the table. Like, there's a saying that affluence equals influence. And so this idea of demonizing money actually ends up robbing us of the ability to utilize it in the best way possible. Just like demonizing marketing means that we're probably not going to pick up the skills for being able to broadcast a concept that could be very powerful and positive to the world. Demonizing money means that we're in a very similar situation. We now can't use it as a tool for good. We're only under its thumb projecting onto it evil.
I think it's I'll go back to what I said earlier. It's the one thing that transcends it all. It transcends border, language, culture, religion, whatever. It's the one thing we all interface with. And so it makes sense that it becomes extremely, and it's tied to our survival, right? Like the very sustenance we eat, the food we eat, we see this as a tethering to the money in our lives. And so it becomes extremely important, extremely valuable, extremely emotional. I think one thing that's for me that has really helped shift how I see money, and I think you would agree with this, Antonia, is instead of seeing things in terms of money, I have started replacing the word money with the word value. And instantly, I've attributed something that is abstract a more accurate way of looking at it than money. So money is attempt to tangibilize something that is abstract. And what is abstract? It's the value creation and exchange between two entities. So let's say I grow a garden of vegetables. I've created value by going out and weeding my garden and fertilizing my garden and spending the time to cultivate the vegetables. I take them to market and I then either trade them for something of equal value that I deem equal. Somebody else maybe trades beef that they've raised on their farm, cattle, beef or whatever, and we trade those back and forth. Or somebody did something else to create value, turn that into a money, a dollar bill or several dollar bills here in the US, and traded me the abstract of the value they created by maybe the beef they sold somewhere else, and they hand me this little green ticket, and then I hand them the vegetables I created. There was a value exchange going on there. There was value being exchanged. Now, one was represented in physical, tangible things like vegetables from my garden. The other was a little bit more abstract in that it was already sold. The other product or service they created, or the talent or the effort they generated, the value they generated, was turned into an abstract form of paper, coin, or digital currency, and they traded that. But what was happening there? What was happening there was a value exchange. That's what's happening all the time. Money doesn't exist outside of value. So anytime you see money, it is a way, it's kind of a bastardized way to give more tangibility to something that is very abstract. So if it is abstract, let's call it what it is. Let's call it the abstract term that it is. It is value. It's not money. Money is just it's a tangible representation of value. Or when I say tangible, I mean in the physical form of paper or coin.
Yeah. Well, and to go one rung up in the ladder of abstraction from even value, it's fundamentally energy. It's energy that we put into something, time, attention, focus, energy. So really what we're doing is we're just trading forms of energy because we have what's called a cost of specialization. So we have a limited, like one of the resources that is truly limited in in an individual human lifespan is time and energy. We can only apply it to so many things at once. And so we codify that time and energy into things that will be of value, not just to ourselves, but to others, because we need the things that they have put their time and energy into, and they've codified it into value, and then we exchange the value. So it's really an energetic exchange, but it's easier, I think, to see it in terms of value.
So let's take this idea of value. I think there's difference between synchronous value and asynchronous value. Now, probably all of it's asynchronous at the end of the day, but just play with me for this concept. If you trade units of your life, if one trades, not you personally, but if one trades units of their life in exchange for other value, which we all do, but there's going to be a much more direct relationship between some people and others. So somebody, for example, that goes into a day job, that clocks in on the work clock, spends 8 hours there working, whether it's knowledge work on a computer or physical labor, manufacturing something, they're trading 8 hours of units of their life. The value they're giving are 8 hours of my life. That's the value I'm contributing. And then the expectation is they'll be given back a set number of value in the form of currency or money for that transaction. So somebody trades 8 hours of their life, they get 8 hours of their life in value back in the form of money. It's a very direct connection between the value exchange. It's a 1-for-1. The hour equals so many dollars or so many coins or whatever the currency is you're using. That's a very direct transaction. Now, let's say somebody says, instead of going to the factory to build the widget and get the 8 hours compensated for a direct way, I'm going to start my own factory. I'm going to put in 16, 18 hours a day. I'm going to employ other people and pay them for their life, for their units of hours. And I'm going to scale this so that the effort I put in now will pay off value back to me, maybe for months or years to come. So you start to see an asynchronous connection here where the value I put in is not directly turned to me. In fact, I might have to start that factory, I might have to take on investors or take out a loan, spend a lot of time, maybe eat and sleep on the floor of that factory for a while to get things started, living a life of almost poverty, what would seem to other people outside. But the vision is that if I put that in, the value now, it will pay off value later. So it's an asynchronous value creation and exchange. And you can already see a lot of us are wired probably to be naturally attracted to some of these over the others. And it's not like any of them are inherently bad or wrong or better than anything else. It's a different way of going about creating value and then get value returned back to you. When you start your own factory, the risk is also higher. It might fail miserably. You might sleep on the floor and eat ramen noodles and drink water and not have any food, and it might all fail. You might have put all that value in and it doesn't work. And I can attest to this in my businesses that I've tried to start in my life. A lot of them have not worked out the best.
Well, and you might go into debt. You might actually be paying.
Yeah.
Instead of getting paid for your time, you might actually end up paying for that venture.
Yeah, you might pay out of your pocket or your personal effort and energy. But the value you're putting in, the risk you're taking is for a asynchronous value back to you at a later time. And so again, just in seeing, zooming in, zooming out, and seeing these two, just that basic example of asynchronous value versus synchronized value, you can already see how people come to the table not even on the same page of how value is created and the exchange is done.
Yeah, well, and I think it's usually people who do the synchronous change, 1 hour for a certain negotiated dollar amount, are the ones who are particularly put off by the idea of somebody doing the asynchronous piece. Because to them, that's how reality works, right? Because it's a very easy algorithm to understand. And the other algorithms, which is that you might end up putting time, effort, and money into something that has risk, but later on has high reward, to them, that doesn't make sense. Why would somebody do that unless they're greedy, right? Unless they just really want a lot of money. And so you can already tell that people have like different reality tunnels that they're experiencing money through. One thing that comes up for me as you're talking is this idea of value. Value is a subjective criteria. When people say, football players make too much money, right? Like they get paid millions of dollars per game and they're not worth that. Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are. The reason why they're worth that is because somebody's willing to pay them for their skill and talent. And there's a very small pool of people that can play at that level. And they've been focused and determined and they're willing to shave years off their life, because I don't think football players live very long. Not really. And they're willing to take all the time, effort, focus, attention, etc. to be at the absolute top of their game. And when they perform at the top of their game, hundreds of thousands, if not actually millions of people are football fans in the country. So millions upon millions of people are willing to stop everything they're doing for a couple hours on the weekend, on a Sunday, to stop and tune in to watch these people have turned themselves into finely crafted machines and strategies to play this out. And so because they're able to get all of that attention for the skill that they developed, they're worth that much money, because they have generated something that millions of people believe is of value. So this idea that value could have some sort of like empirical measurement, right? And like we all know something's of value or not of value, because I'm not a football fan. I think football's okay. I'll watch it. And I think it's more interesting now that I understand how the game is played. It's not that big of a deal, but I'm definitely not like a football fan. Like I won't stop everything to go watch it. So to me and my subjective sense of value, I don't understand why those people would get millions of dollars until I look at it from an aerial view and go, now I understand, because to millions upon millions of people, they are of that kind of value. They will garner that level of attention. Same thing with celebrities of almost every category, movie stars, musicians, etc., painters, people who are in the arts. If they can get a ton of people to stop everything they're doing and pay attention to them, then they're worth whatever evaluation they're getting, because now people are willing to pay that kind of money to have access to the skill that they've developed. So this idea of like, well, you shouldn't be getting paid for the thing you're doing is a ridiculous statement. Because if people are paying you for the thing you're doing, then you should get paid for the thing you're doing, because those people's subjective evaluation has decided that you are worth doing value exchange with.
Yeah, and I mean, taking that football example, that's a really great example, because it really wouldn't be worth it to have you and me, if we had tens of millions of dollars, to hire football players, like 2 football players, to come and play in our backyard, just the 2 of them with no audience. I mean, maybe it'd be valuable to the 2 of us if we were really fans of those football players or something, but there's no way to necessarily turn that into an asset to create more value. And so what you see here is you're seeing things stacked in value. It's contextual. The reason why those football players are paid so much is because the playing on the field, again, brings the audience, like you said, which allows them to sell advertising, which allows them to reach people with products and services, which makes value for companies that want to advertise on those channels. So you start to layer in the value. And if all one is doing, again, not you're probably listening and you get a lot of this, but one could see that and go, why is that football player getting millions of dollars? Well, because it's an ecosystem. They're plugged into a system that can capitalize on the value that they're bringing to the table. And it's really worth a lot in that context. It's not worth as much in my backyard as it is on the football field at Heinz Stadium in Pittsburgh for the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's a much different context. And so I think that's something to take into account too. Probably when something baffles you why someone's getting compensated as much as they are, take a minute and think, what is the ecosystem that's benefiting from this compensation? It's not the fact that this person's making too much money. It's that there must be an even greater ecosystem of value being created in some way for the compensation to be this high for this person's efforts on a one-to-one level that I just don't seem to get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and a part of value is convincing people of that value. That's a piece of it. That's where persuasion and marketing comes in. Because on the flip side, you look at somebody like a school teacher. School teachers I don't personally think that they get paid commensurate to the job that they're doing. But obviously, that's how much we've decided to evaluate that position. Because as a culture, that's how much we're paying them. So that's how much we value them as a society. We value them the amount that we're paying. I don't think it's worth it, but apparently some teachers feel like it's worth it because a part of what gets put on them is also a good feeling. So a part of evaluation is not just the the monetary compensation you get, it's also an esteem piece or a sense of contribution or whatever else is coming in there. So value exchange doesn't just have to be dollars. It can also be other components. But as we as a society have decided that that's how much we're going to pay teachers. So that's how much we value them. Now, is that jacked up? Maybe. Maybe that is jacked up, but it actually speaks more to our priorities than it does to whether or not that's what that job is worth. Because at any given moment, the amount it's getting paid is how much we have collectively decided to evaluate it. So a big piece of this too is like, as we judge whether or not somebody should be able to make money off of something, is recognizing that that is a completely subjective experience for us. That is our personal evaluation. That is not a collective evaluation. There is no empirical right, wrong gradient of evaluation other than whatever the culture is saying at the time. That's the only thing. And that is that's very fickle. There was a time period where CDs were considered very valuable. We would go purchase CDs in their jewel cases for like $15 because we believe the ability to have access to music on a small CD or, like a compact disc was worth $15, which is actually, equivalent to a lot of people's hours worth of work. So we would trade an hour worth of work. Actually, at that time, more like 2 hours worth of work. We would trade two hours worth of work to get that compact disc. Well, now I spend $10 a month on Apple, what is the iTunes store, like Apple Music, where I get like basically every song that's ever recorded for the most part for $10 a month.
Yeah.
And so now my evaluation of music is completely different. So evaluations can change over time based on new technologies and how society shifts in their thought and in their access, etc. But really, it comes down to that's how much we're willing to pay at the moment. And a big piece of that is the persuasiveness. Like, teachers are not very persuasive. If they were more persuasive, if they could really get us to understand exactly the service that they're rendering for our kids, if we could really, really understand what's going on there, we would be persuaded to pay them more. But they're not very persuasive, even as a teachers union, to get us to pay them more. And of course, it goes through the ecosystem of the federal government and how much the federal government is willing to pay, and etc. Like, there's a lot of things going on here. But this concept of like empirical evaluation is actually we think it exists, and actually it's just a representation of our own personal bias. So if you've got people who have this sense of cynicism and have an unhealthy relationship with money, and then they're combining that with like subjective concepts around value, it ends up creating this confusion about why the world works the way that it does.
Well, and that's why money is so important to us, is because value, as much as we want it to be, is not static, right? A value is continually flexible, continually dynamic. It really is what the market, quote unquote, will bear out, or what the consensus will force. Certain jobs and things are compensated because of force, not because of what the market would actually pay for it. And so we go, man, that is just, seeing things in terms of value is so complex. Let's bring it back down to money. Let's bring it back down. So that's something I can understand. Even though that's complex, it's just a cover for value. It makes it much more, at least perceived to be manageable for us. But I still think that the solution is to detach this idea of value and money, see them as free-floating entities, and see value as actually what's going on. The next time, if you do work a job that's an hourly wage job, and you go out to dinner and you spend $30, let's say you make $15 an hour in US dollars, just to say you work here in the US, and you spend $30 at dinner, think in terms of, I just traded 2 hours of my life for this dinner. just that little shift in seeing value exchange instead of just direct money, like, because that's actually what you did. You traded 2 hours of your life that you will never get back for maybe that 30-minute dinner that cost you $30. And that right there, just that little tweak to your life could give you such a perspective of where you're putting your time, your attention, your money, your value exchange. It could be a huge aha for you.
Yeah. Well, but I would say on top of that, that's the fact that we're able to go purchase a delicious meal and that exchange for 2 hours of our life is a modern luxury, because it used to be that a day would go into making food that may or may not be that good to eat.
Of course, of course.
So in the long timeline of our life cycle as a species, it's also a matter of recognizing that we're in a time period of value exchange that no other human being has ever experienced. Like, I get to go buy fruit from the store for an extremely small amount of money that before would have been priceless. Because first of all, you couldn't have accessed it during certain time periods of the year, and second of all, it would have been rotten by the time you got it. And so, like, it's, I just get access to produce that just nobody's had access to in the past. And so that's the other thing, is that we have a tendency to evaluate things based on our current context, forgetting the evaluation of things as they used to be.
Yeah.
But we just acclimate to this like concept of value, like as in, like, this is how reality has always worked.
I remember holding a banana one time and thinking to myself, this banana cost me 60 cents US? And thinking in terms of, in my old biblical days, reading about the wealthiest man that ever lived, Solomon, in the Bible, right? He had all this, even if you're not a Christian or have read the Bible, you probably know the story of Solomon, had just immense amount of wealth. And I probably have access to fresh fruit, like a banana, at 60 cents, much more than even Solomon did. Unless he had banana trees outside his palace, he would have to send a detail out to get bananas and bring them back to his palace. And like you said, they may be rotten by that point or whatever. So, I mean, just think in terms of how the value that we have created as humans, this exchange we've done, we've gotten sophisticated to where we have a lot of blessing and ability in our lives based on that, which is really incredible. And I think the next time that you look at marketing and you want to kind of think in terms of it being negative, just remember that. Like, remember fruit, like you said. I think that's really, really a good example of that, because that has not been something that's accessible at the lowest cost it is now to all of us.
Yeah. So recognizing value as like a shifting thing, recognizing it as a contextual thing, realizing that it's attached, like money is just a representation of value, which is just a representation of energy. I think that this makes it it's a little easier to hold it in your hands without specifically judging it. But just to kind of wrap this all up, I do want to make a statement that because it's not going anywhere, we need to do better with how we experience money, I believe, as a species. I think that we are at a time period where I understand why we experience money the way that we do. I think it's wrapped up into ego and the lack of ego transcendence, because it's all about making sure that I'm surviving. And because our egos are so intent on survival, I think that our inability to get past that as a species, some people do ego transcendence work and some people have managed to get there, but the overwhelming majority of human beings have not. And so because of that, we're constantly in this battle of this almost imaginary battle of survival at all times. And so I actually understand why we're at the place with money that we are. Like, there's really no other place we could be. Like, this is where we're at with money. But I do think that we could do better. The only way we're going to get there, though, the only way we're not going to have this disgusting disparity of funds, right? Where some people are literally dying of malnutrition while other people have more resource than they could possibly ever spend in a lifetime. Like, that's just not sustainable. It's an unsustainable model for humanity. And I do believe that we could do better. But the only way we're going to get there is if we stop demonizing the tool. Money is not the problem. Even the desire to make money is not the problem. The problem is in us not understanding that money itself will not sate the ego. And so ego transcendence work is pretty much the only way to get there, or having a group of leaders get to ego transcendence work and other people following suit. But we can't do it while we're demonizing the tool. So as long as you just have this attitude towards money or attitudes towards making money. I mean, I know, what was that billionaire who has 100% thrown his ring? He's not going to work with. In fact, the Democrats got really mad at him during last year during election time.
I don't know his name, but I know who you're talking
I
about.
can't remember his name, but he's a billionaire. He refuses to work with any political, faction. He refuses to make it about government, and he is decided that, as far as he's concerned, the most important thing that he can focus on is environmentalism. And so he's spending a huge chunk of change, billions of dollars, on moving forward environmental causes. I think of J.K. Rowling, who is no longer a billionaire. She was a billionaire at one time, but she's no longer a billionaire because she puts her money into causes that she believes in. I think of Bill and Melinda Gates and how they have thrown their billions of dollars. Well, I don't know if they've actually donated billions of dollars, but I bet that, it's probably in the hundreds of millions of all of the things that they've done in order to help deal with infections in a part of the world that they're not even from, in a continent that they don't even come from. They are throwing millions upon millions of dollars at solving problems there. So it's not like money is always used for evil. And the more we demonize it, the less we can utilize it for purposes of good, which is fundamentally what we want all of our tools to be utilized as. So getting a healthy relationship with money, getting a healthy relationship with marketing, getting a healthy relationship with how all of this works, and recognizing you don't have to always make it about your ego, whether you love it or you hate it. That's ego, right? Whether you think it's like people who want money are bad or people who are lazy and don't want money are bad, like that's all a projection of your ego and the shit you have not worked through. So get a healthy relationship with your ego, get a healthy relationship with these tools, and try to see if you can build a better life for yourself while utilizing these tools to make an impact on the people around you as well.
That was well said. I like that. I really have nothing else to follow up with it, so I think we should wrap up.
Okay, sounds good.
If you, it was just really well said. If you have anything you'd like to say, a comment, question, something that you was triggered for you, like not triggered in a bad way, but like came up for you basically, like something you want to articulate, we'd love to hear from you. I think it's really cool if we get a conversation started about this over at personalityhacker.com. Find this episode, leave a comment, ask a question right below this. Let's get a discussion started and continue building community around some of these ideas. What is your relationship with money? How do you see it? What is your growth path? Have you begun to see things in your life as value instead of money? Is that something you've already come to the table? You've already come to that conclusion in your life. Where are you in the timeline? I want to hear your story. We want to get your story, your feedback, your experience. Come over to personalityhacker.com. You can also go over to facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack, HACK, to join a community of like minds online in social media that think not exactly like you, but they're interested in the same values, the same interests, the same idea of growing ourselves as people toward a better future, a better tomorrow. So come over and do that when you get a chance.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it. I don't know how much of this is repurposed from that one podcast on Is Making Money Wrong, but I think that it's an important enough topic that if we go through some of it again, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you enjoyed this podcast, and even if you enjoyed it and it was a repurpose of a previous podcast, subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you're feeling particularly generous, please feel free to leave us a rating and review on iTunes. It helps us out a lot.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.